we strongly deny any of this, any accusation of war crimes. But of course, we are very open for any kind of comments. We are very open for any kind of investigation. We clearly, and I clearly gave orders to fire back only at firing positions. Unfortunately, of course, they were using for firing positions. They were using this town. There was no intent on Georgia troops to fire on civilians. These are our citizens. Our troops are clearly trained to protect civilians. There were certainly war crimes committed, certainly not by us.
What he's talking about is the other side of the story. Crimes committed by Ossetians against Georgians. And you only have to drive down the main road into Tskhinvali to see the most shocking of them. These piles of rubble were once ethnic Georgian villages, destroyed immediately after the war in revenge attacks by South Ossetian militia. Ossetians say the villages were used by the Georgian military, but this was plainly a family home. Its former occupants are now among the 16,000 Georgian refugees from South Ossetia sheltering on the other side of the dividing line. It's hard to believe that the Georgian family who lived here will ever be allowed to return. The destruction of this house and hundreds of others is a deliberate act of ethnic cleansing. In Tskhinvali, I met one of the perpetrators.
It was not cleansing. There wasn't any genocide of the Georgian people. No one was killed. They were given a corridor so that they could calmly get out of there. When they'd left their villages, their houses were burnt so they didn't return. It's enough just to set light to the curtains and the whole house will flare up. If you ever want to burn someone's house, that's my advice. Simply set light to the curtains and that's enough.
But Russia, as well as its South Ossetian allies, is implicated at least indirectly in that crime. By the time the Georgian villages were burned, Russian troops had finally arrived in force. Yet they failed to prevent the willful destruction of civilian property and may even have connived at it.
No, this is not ethnic cleansing. This was also the area of the war. The Georgians, when I say that the Georgians were moving their artillery and tanks closer to Tskhinval, this also included the Georgian enclaves inside South Ossetia, where they secretly organized strongholds.
But we've talked, for example, to Ossetian militiamen who talked about how they burnt and destroyed those houses after the immediate conflict. Shouldn't Russia somehow have prevented that from happening?
Well, of course, when your city is attacked, when your loved ones, when your relatives, when your children, when your parents, brothers and sisters are being killed brutally, you can go emotional and you can go really in a very unwanted way.
But while Russia's forgiving of its Ossetian allies, has the West overlooked possible crimes by its Georgian partners? The phrase tit for tat doesn't in some way, you don't think, diminish what appears to be at least partly indiscriminate action against civilians. Tit for tat implies fighters.
Well, tit for tat, military tit for tat, is people attacking each other and trying to kill each other. And so you may think that is not a serious description. I think it is a serious description. And at no stage have we belittled any of the suffering or the death that has been caused. What I think is important is that whatever the dispute between South Ossetians and Georgians, whatever the rights and wrongs of what each of them did, and I've talked at every stage about wrongs as well as rights, that does not justify one country invading another.
This is where my son was buried. Here. He was killed on the 9th of August at about 10 a.m. We buried him on the 10th. They killed him.
Caught in the tit for tat, neither Taya nor her son Georgi were trying to kill anyone. And for her, the eventual arrival of the Russians meant she could finally emerge from the cellar to make a temporary grave for him here. An Ossetian view of the conflict is summed up by a neighbour who stops me as I leave.
I bow down before the great Russian people. Thank you for everything.
We don't know how many Ossetian civilians were killed in the fighting. Initial Russian estimates of 1,500 to 2,000 now appear wildly exaggerated. The true number is probably somewhere between 150 and 350. But for a small town like Tskhinvali, that's a lot. If some of them died, as appears, from indiscriminate force, that's a war crime no less real for being committed by a firm ally of the West.